It is the 200 level. Mike Carpenter in the basement studio on a Wednesday evening, about to talk with the one and only Isaac Ambrose to get his thoughts ahead of this Illinois football season. We are just about 2 weeks from kickoff against Eastern Illinois at home. Basically a preseason game, if you will, not to, talk too badly about the Panthers from Charleston, but this is a program that you should cruise easily over in your opening week matchup. And then that gives you a couple extra days to get ready for the big one, Kansas, on September, oh boy, what is that, 6th? The dates are escaping me, but I do know that that is the game that will kind of set the tone for this season. And there's plenty of other opportunities, but if we were to really circle a big moment for Bret Bielema's program in year 4, that seems to be the one. And this leads to a conversation I wanted to get out of the way real quick here, because a bit of a Twitter kerfluffle, and sometimes I find myself embroiled in these. Sometimes I inject myself into this, so I can't really sit here and blame anyone but myself. So I'm not going to do that. But right now, that is not a sellout, the Illinois-Kansas game. And that doesn't particularly surprise me. I mentioned in the last podcast that the 2023 Illinois football season did a number on me. I went in very optimistic, very excited, and then the 5-7 record was just really deflating, and I'm sure a lot of Illini fans feel that way. But I also tried to say in that last podcast that, wait a second, Bret Bielema's doing a pretty darn good job in the relative history of Illinois football. And actually, if you look at the last 4 or 5 coaches, if you're looking post-Makovic, there's no Illini coach that's been as consistent over his first 3 years at the helm. And consider what he inherited. Yes, he did inherit talent, as we saw in 2022 when things came together. But the program as a whole was a mess. So that was a very quick reclamation project by a coach that I think is objectively good at his job. However, there have been enough disappointments in the last 3 years to keep a game like Kansas so far from being a sellout. Now, on Twitter, I might have been a little bit coy about it, but the person that I'm going to refer to here is Robert Rosenthal, who does a very good job with his blog, Illini, and he's as in-depth of a Illini football mind as you're going to find, far more than me. I mean, by comparison, I am a very, see, if I said fair weather fan, someone would say, see, Carp, we know, no. Sometimes I suppose that would be accurate, because I do sort of respond to how the program is playing or how they're performing. I'm not nearly as knowledgeable about the 2 or let alone the 3 deep as he is. And his knowledge of Illinois history is pretty much unrivaled, if you think about it. So I want to start by saying that when it comes to Illinois football, he knows more than I do. He is also a bigger fan than I am, just as I'm probably a bigger Illinois basketball fan than he is. So that's okay. Those are differences that you get sometimes when it comes to college fandom. Now, the issue that I took with the tweet of his earlier this week has more to do with not just him, but with Illini fans that would ever try to pull the "this is how you're supposed to" fan card. If I were to paraphrase, he was saying, why is this Kansas game not a sellout? If we're going to be a big boy program, we need to start selling tickets like we are a big boy program. And there's some validity to that, though I do think in this name, image, likeness era, it's a little bit less relevant. In other words, when you got big donors willing to pay players, are the players that might come to your school thinking, wait a second, they only got 50,000 people to that night game against Kansas instead of 60. I'm not going there. I don't think that's going to play too much of a role in recruiting. I do understand, though, there is a perception thing, and Illinois has been battling this. And if we are to be honest about the improvements made under Bret Bielema, you would hope that the ticket sales would come with it. I would argue they have, when you consider that last year was the best game-by-game attendance that we've had, I think, since 2008. So Bret Bielema has ignited some enthusiasm, but that is not going to offset not just decades of futility, and it's not going to offset the close losses that we've had under Bret Bielema, which got to a level last year, especially with Wisconsin, where as a fan, you throw your hands up in the air, and you say, to hell with it. Now, hope always springs eternal at the start of a new season, but I think it's somewhat foolish to expect that Illinois fans are going to pack the house for Kansas. That is a wait-and-see game. It's a wait-and-see game for me. I hope it goes well. I think there's a 50-50 shot it does, and the 50% shot it doesn't is because they got Jalen Daniels and we don't. That scares me. We have Aaron Henry, and they have Jalen Daniels. I don't like that defensive coordinator versus opposing quarterback matchup. But what I had tweeted on Tuesday, was, listen, fan however the hell you want to. And I've been very open on this podcast and on Twitter and in my Substack that I started back in March. I've always been honest about what I do. But I would hope, and if I have, please call me out on it. I would hope that I've never once said, hey, Illini fans, this is what you should do. I've never said boycott games. I've never said go to games. I've never said don't buy tickets. I've never said buy tickets. This is something that I think is your decision to make as a fan, which might seem obvious, right? But not to everybody in the Twitter sphere, especially those that agree with Robert on this. You know, I think about these sorts of conversations, and it might sound like it's a feud or something. I've never met Robert once. If I did, I would happily have a conversation with him. And maybe we could have a good faith conversation about things like this. But I also wonder how fruitful would that be, because his level of Illini football fandom is so far above and beyond mine, and I wouldn't pretend any differently. But the bridge too far, I think, is any time that Illini voice pretends to be the arbiter of how we should or should not act. Fandom is a very personal thing, and you're going to act however you want to, as you should. I mean, it's sports, for Christ's sake. You are not obligated to any team or program. It is a game played by a bunch of people you've never met, and the only reason you're rooting for them is because they're wearing the colors that you rooted for your entire life. That's it. Now, that's not to dismiss how important, how valuable it can be. There's a reason I'm doing this podcast. I love Illini sports. I love Illini football, despite the fact that they continue to pull the rug out from under me and every other Illini football fan. But I guess my big takeaway that I try to get across, and there were some really good counterpoints from followers of both of us, because there's probably a little bit of crossover, that my big thing is, do you. And if that means you're not going to go to the Kansas game because it's either too expensive or you got to wait and see what you're looking at, that's fine. I'm probably not going to the Eastern game. If I am, I'm going to the first half. I got to wake up at 5:30 the next morning to teach 8th graders. Sorry, but a preseason game against Eastern Illinois starting at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night is not exactly doing it for me in terms of excitement. But I'll probably find my way over there because, come on, how many Illini football games do I get to go to each year? 7 max. So I wanted to get that out of the way before we get Isaac, a diehard fan by any measure, on the podcast, because, you know, I don't think this is any situation. I think Robert is always well-intentioned. I think that he bleeds orange and blue about as much as anybody, but I don't quite understand why it needs to take that next step into why aren't other fans doing what I do? And there are many obvious answers as to why Illini football has not sold out Kansas, and fans are waiting. I think the Michigan game will be a sellout no matter what. But second game of the year after going 5-7 after a good year. I mean, come on, history repeating itself at a certain point. I understand why fans say, screw it. I'm sitting this one out. I'll be there. And if it gets really bad, I'm going to be fuming in the stands thinking, why did we not buy out of this game? But hey, that's probably yet another difference between me and the really hardcore Illini football fans of Robert's ilk. I give them credit. They are there no matter what. I'm not. And, but I've never been dishonest about that. And I'm not going to tell you that you should or should not do what I do as a fan, because fandom's just kind of silly to begin with. So who am I to say that to you? All right. Wanted to get that out of the way. We got Isaac coming up in just a bit. Before we do, want to let you know that the 200 level is brought to you by Hamilton Walkers. We're going to be there on October 3rd, Longtime and myself, for a book event. That is the general release date of the 200 level book. It's back there, so I can't throw it up here, but you've heard the promo. You've seen it on Twitter, on Facebook. Only got a couple more weeks left to take pre-orders, but on October 3rd at Hamilton Walkers, Lon and I will be there. I will probably, when I get there, enjoy one of their bone-in steaks. The great thing is my wife and I are going to go for an anniversary dinner the week before, so I get 2 Hamilton Walkers meals in about the span of a week. Get a bone-in steak. They got these family-style sides. So to give you an example, we usually get the green beans, which are fantastic. And they also have those roasted red skin potatoes that are, oh my God, so good. A lot of people love the mac and cheese and, of course, the steak fries. That's kind of my personal favorite when I got a bone-in steak. To rinse it down, I think, for my money, the best old-fashioned in town, but that is just one of the many great cocktails they make. Hamilton Walkers is essentially 5-star dining with no pretension. And that's what I love about it. The service is immaculate. The food is the best in Champaign. And I feel very honored that they would put their name on this podcast. So thanks to Nathan and the staff over there at Hamilton Walkers, and Andrew as well, who is a longtime 93.5 listener. Hamilton Walkers, downtown Champaign. Be sure to check them out for steaks, seafood, and drinks. Also, Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. I love this line here that they sent. When your pipes are in a pinch and your drains are feeling the strain, who do you call? The plumbing pros, of course. At Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, we're your reliable partners in all things plumbing. From leaky faucets to clogged drains, we can get any problem you have cleaned up and taken care of. Our licensed plumbers are on call 24/7, ready to swoop in and save the day whenever a plumbing emergency strikes. Don't let a plumbing problem ruin your day. Trust Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing to get the job done. Give them a call at 217-841-4728. That's 217-841-4728, or visit them online at dogtownheatingandair.com. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Got to thank Brian Hansen, State Farm agent at brianismyguy.com for life, auto, home, business, renters, you name it. State Farm has you covered, and Brian and his staff are second to none in terms of communication, how quickly they get back to you to answer any question that you may have. And when it comes to matters of insurance, I need to trust that the person I'm talking to knows what they're talking about. And Brian does. He's a good dude to boot. So that is Brian Hansen, State Farm agent at brianismyguy.com. And finally, Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. Luke and his staff can work on basically any home project. A lot of outdoor stuff they can do year round. You still got plenty of warm months ahead. So why not get a free quote? And you can check out a gallery of their work online at owenbuildersllc.com. Got to thank Champagne Showers Podcast Network, and of course you, the listener and the viewer. And just a reminder, the book, The 200 Level, an Illinois Fighting Illini Basketball Fan's Journey, it's a mouthful, is available for pre-order at the200levelpod.com. Very humbled by the response so far. Overwhelmed that we've gotten this kind of response for the pre-order. And we're going to have some retail locations in October as well, which we're excited about. But thank you for all those that have supported that. So we're going to give this a shot and going Zoom style here. Isaac Ambrose. Let's go with the gallery view. There we go. I see Isaac on the left side of the screen, and we'll see if this doesn't work on the first bit. If not, you're going to have absolutely just awesome podcasting as we try to get this thing hooked up here. So Isaac is going to be on the horn here. I see the camera starting. He's got the AirPods in. I don't know if he can hear. He waved.
Hello.
There he is. I can hear Isaac. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
That's about as seamless, Isaac, as I think I've ever had on Zoom. So we're off to a flying start here. How are things up in Michigan, man?
Good. Yeah. I love it's easy to be happy up here in the summertime, that's for sure. We've had some really beautiful weather, which I'm sure that's what everybody wants to hear about, that's tuned in right now is the weather. So
Getting older, Isaac. That's all we talk about.
Yeah. So no, it's been great. Back to where a lot of my family and friends are. So it's good to be back there. Gonna miss Champagne. But my goal is to come back for, if not all, most of the Big Ten home games.
We got quite the gauntlet coming up in October too. So before we get into this season, I can find myself to get excited by the time game one kicks off, and maybe a little bit less so this year with Eastern Illinois, but nonetheless, I'll wake up that morning and have that buzz of a new football season. But I got to be honest, it is slightly informed by last year's disappointing finish. Well, disappointing beginning and ending with a pretty decent middle there. So where are you on that? Like, are you allowing last year to kind of influence how excited you are, or are you trying your best to just wipe that out of your system? Is that even possible to wipe a lot of what happened last year out of your system?
I think, unfortunately, like, just being realistic, if you take 2 years out of it, as amazing as that was more of the outlier, right? So again, with Bielema, I think the floor is so much higher than it was in the past, but that doesn't mean that we completely erase, his first year there, and then now last year, which I do feel like Bielema is the guy, especially to keep us out of the basement of the Big Ten. But it is hard to not think about even before the Bielema era, and then just the way we've lost, some of the games his first year and then his third year. I would say I feel better than I did, obviously, early 2010s and just the basement, era. But heading into the season, I definitely wouldn't say there's a little bit of like a hindrance in the back of my mind, just thinking about what happened last season, thinking about how really bad the defense was last year, and you still had Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, who has been on Hard Knocks, for the Bears. Like, And not that the D line's everything, but you had the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, and your defense was awful. So like what's that going to mean for the defense, the offense? Isaiah Williams was a stud. I mean, there's just a lot to replace. So I say, with all that being said, I would say I'm more so leaning on the side of, not to give predictions, but scraping for a bowl game is going to be more like what I'm thinking of than getting back to what we were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the good thing about that is, unlike last year when I went with that 9-3 prediction at Poor Brothers, yikes. Which, you know what, I will stand the same way I stood with Lon and I's prediction before Ron Zook's final year. We had Dare to Dream, and we said they're going to go 9-3, and they started 6-0. And frankly, they should have went 9-3. I don't know if last year's team should have went 9-3, but that schedule, man, I just hate to say that was kind of a missed opportunity. However, if we were to look positively at what this team can do, let's start with each side of the ball. I know offensively, you do lose Isaiah Williams, who was just absolutely a stud last year. Maybe not so much on special teams, but man, offensively, as far as receiving goes, the first Illinois receiver to get all Big Ten honors since God knows when, and well-deserved. And then the sure-handed Casey Washington. It does seem to be more of a committee approach when it comes to Pat Bryant and Malik Elzy, hoping Pat Bryant makes the step. But I got to be honest, the offense, out of all the different units on offense, I'm about as confident at wide receiver because of the addition of Zachary Franklin. And to me, if I were to make a comparison to other wide receiver transfers that came in and immediately became the dude, you could say a Josh Imatorbhebhe, or you could say a Geronimo Allison before that were these somewhat proven commodities wherever they had played before, and then they come in, you slot them in that number one spot. I think, Isaac, my most confidence on the offense somehow is with the wide receiver unit. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but when you look at the offense, what are you most confident in?
Sorry, the classic Zoom mute button got me. I would say most confidence. I agree with the wide receivers. You feel pretty good with Pat Bryant, with Zachary Franklin, with Elzy. I mean, a couple years ago we were thinking Elzy was going to easily come in and be the guy right away. So the fact that he still has a lot of that potential, and you see that skill set, the fact that he's probably your third option means like you've gotten a lot deeper in that wide receiver room. I would say confidence-wise, I know the beginning of last year was pretty rough with the offensive line. I arguably feel the most confident about the offensive line on that side of the ball, just from the sense of, I think JC Davis is going to be really good. And then I think you're bringing back all three interior guys, right? Are with Kreutz, with Geske, and other guard I'm forgetting.
Yeah, but it's like Chrysler being the other. And
Chrysler, yep, that's right.
All the news about, let's call it whispers, but it's a little bit louder than that, about Melvin Priestley out of camp on the right side. And presumably more depth.
And again, just like how I'm a little more on the tentative side going into this season based on history. The first part of last season was sort of the outlier for Bielema's offensive line, Bart Miller's offensive line. So that's why I would feel more I mean, you still put Isaiah Adams in the NFL. Tip Ryman was a great blocking tight end. Maybe as far as blocking goes, I feel a little bit worse. Maybe that Tip Ryman's gone and Cole Rusk is obviously down with that injury now. So, but just those five guys, and then even 6'7", you have Kevin Wigington, who was starting at Michigan State, right? And he's not even going to start for you. So if you can have a guy like that was starting at a Big Ten program come in and add to your depth, I feel pretty good about the offensive line, just because whenever you return guys and guys get older, those seem like Bielema's type guys, right? The guys that stay in a program, they develop, they put on muscle, things like that. And then I know it's been talked about now, and like Jeremy, Joey, those guys have written about it, but like the JC Davis thing is like, that's nothing to, that's something that should be taken pretty serious, that he could have been like a 5th or 6th round pick. And now he's starting, he's going to be starting a tackle for you. And Priestley too, it sounds like he was a higher caliber recruit, and Joey wrote an awesome story on him recently. He could have been, at a bigger school for sure, but just had some life stuff happen. So I really feel like once those five guys get to be like one cohesive unit, And I mean, Fagan probably makes it easier to block for. You don't have to hold your block as long or push a guy that far off the line when you have Fagan and McCray behind you. So those are the five guys I would say I feel pretty good about, especially going in later into the Big Ten season.
In a way, I think that the wide receivers and the line play, those two units, raise your floor, and you feel pretty good that whatever group you put out there, because of depth and because of some proven commodities. So let's say JC Davis coming in, that's a proven commodity at the most important position on the line. Zakhari Franklin is a proven commodity, especially in Barry Lunney's system at your number one wide receiver position. And I think that only enhances what a Pat Bryant could do, because he seems to be knocking on the door himself of an 800, 900, I don't know about 1,000-yard, but a very, very productive season. So to me, Isaac, the notion that this could be a very good offense is not crazy, and it rests on quarterback and running back. So to me, the floor raises immensely with the wide receivers and the line play with the additions he made, especially. And now you can take that next step based on two things. One, a healthy running back room. If Caden Fagan stays healthy all year, I think you're going bowling. And if Luke Altmaier stays healthy and is productive all year, I think you're going bowling. Can those two things happen? Luke Altmaier almost made it through the whole season healthy last year. Caden Fagan has gotten hurt the last 2 years he's played football. But does it appear that way to you, that like we know kind of what the floor is, and it's going to be at least a serviceable offense? But man, if those two pieces end up working out and an Aiden Lawfrey turns out to be a nice kind of scat back, your Darren Sproles, if you will, to change pace and offer some things out of the backfield, I like the pieces there. And I do think that's a potential top half of the Big Ten offense.
Absolutely. The running back health is going to be huge. I mean, just the past few years, like some of the guys that have had to take reps in games because it always feels like going into the season, especially since Bielema's been here and even prior, we had, some talent at running back, but then just all of a sudden got thinner and thinner. Freak things start to happen, which unfortunately all three of your top backs, which I think could start, probably all three start on bottom of the half Big Ten, on a lot of lower level Big Ten teams. They've all had injury history, right? Like you were touching on. So if they stay healthy, the O-line stays healthy, even though they are a little bit deeper. And this is obvious, right? I think if Altmaier gets hurt again, now I would have never said this about John Paddock, right? Maybe Donovan Leary's like the next John Paddock, but if Altmaier gets hurt, that's a big deal. Obviously, like that goes without saying, but yeah, health is huge. I think with the luck you've had with running back, we're due, right? We're due for all three of the guys to stay healthy this year. Because if a couple years ago, after the McCray had the season he had, if you would have told me he was going to be your second or even third running back, I'd be like, holy smokes, you must have a first round pick ahead of him. So I feel like if you can stay healthy, you should definitely go bowling. Again, not to jinx it, because the offense was putting up great numbers last year for most of the season. It didn't matter because of the other side of the ball. So. But I would say, if all those guys can stay healthy, especially your key guys, Franklin, Altmaier, Pat Bryant, Caden Fagan, at least McCray or Aiden Lawfrey, and then pretty much the offensive line. We're not off to a great start with Cole Rusk getting hurt, but I feel like that if those key guys can stay healthy, and the offensive line feels like it's the main room where you could survive an injury. Because those other positions, I mean, wide receiver, especially like with what Lunney does, you got to have a lot of guys ready to go and getting rest and things like that.
I don't want to diminish the Cole Rusk injury because it is a big deal. But the weird thing about it is we aren't going to know what he would have done. So in a weird way, as the season goes along, I suppose if we are finding ourselves having trouble scoring in the red zone, then you're thinking about that tight end target. But we did a lot better in the red zone last year than we did in 2022. But to be honest, Isaac, if it weren't Cole Rusk, I mean, I wish no one had gotten injured in that projected starting 11. Other than him, the only ones that I'd potentially say, oh, fine, take that, would be maybe one of the guards because of depth. But if you think about it, I don't want to trade my tackles for injury. I don't want to trade a Zakhari Franklin or Pat Bryant. You could argue the slot because that's a little bit interchangeable. In other words, as much of a bonus and as good as Cole Russ could have been this year in terms of guys you can't afford to lose on offense, around 6, 7. I got to just say it sucks that he's hurt, but for preseason injuries so far, knock on wood, thank God it's not Luke Altmaier, Caden Fagan, your tackles, Zachary Franklin, because then I do think it's, 5-alarm fire at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to obviously the Minnesota Vikings situation with what JJ McCarthy, what happened to him is worse because he was the future and everything, but it's a little bit similar to, you never know. McCarthy could have been on. I mean, he could have gone on and been terrible and had an awful, awful season. So they're never really going to know. Just like how on a much minor scale in Central Illinois, we are never going to know. What Russ could have been until at least next year. Yeah, so that is true. That's a position that you can. Sorry, the dog's here. That's a position that it seems like, because we never saw it, and there's been so many guys in the past where they're camp heroes, and the coaches talk a lot about them, which that's what the coaches they're supposed to do. They're talking about what they're seeing. So the fact that we never got to see it makes it a little less hard to swallow, I feel like. But I agree. I mean, if Franklin or Altmaier or Fagan or any of those guys or JC were to go down, it would have felt like we were really starting from behind the 8 ball.
Where are you on Luke Altmaier? We were texting, me, you, and Trevor about him, and I'll go back to the first game last year, and even during the Penn State game, I didn't walk out to lot 31 saying, "God, this ain't gonna work." There was something about him that I inherently liked from the start, and I know that if one were to get kind of cynical about a Luke Altmaier because he doesn't have the swag of a John Paddock. He doesn't certainly, and who does, have the swag of a Tommy DeVito. But I think he's a legit quarterback. And I'm excited with a better line in front of him, especially. And now starting the year with hopefully a good running game, which they did not have until about game 7 last year. I'm excited to see what he can do because I think a balanced offense like we saw for much of the Wisconsin game, the Maryland game before that, and then a little bit more self-confidence for him to, take some more chances and not let that Penn State game get in his head. I think there is a sneaky high ceiling for him. I'm excited to see him in his second full year.
Absolutely. I think the thing, my favorite thing about Altmaier is that even if he never becomes like some sensational passer that's, dropping balls into the money spot every single time, he's so great with his legs, right? And when you have a Fagan or McCray, Lawfrey, guys like that you're running that zone read, they're constantly getting 3-4 yards, then he can keep it. And that was the problem with DeVito, and even going back to Brandon Peters, right, was they were topping out, it felt like, at 10, 12 miles an hour. I'm sure it was better than that. But Altmaier, you saw a couple times he had some speed. I think it was the Kansas game, right? He had like a 50-yard touchdown run or even further than that.
Yeah.
And there was just a handful of times he was able to keep it on the ground, keep it with his legs. So I feel like the better he does get at game management, making the throws he needs to make, it's going to even make his running game better too, because the defense is going to, have to be able to cover both and try to figure out how to stop the different weapons. I think, yeah, especially if Franklin can step into like that Isaiah Williams role. And like you talked about the lines better, hopefully core running backs, things like that. It should only make Altmaier better. And I'm not trying to flip this again to the defensive side of the ball, but I think if your defense can keep the score down at times, then it puts Altmaier in a better spot too. Because like the Kansas game last year, which that felt like that was over, right when it started. He came back a little bit, but that one felt too like you could almost see Altmaier and some of the other guys realize on the offensive side of the ball, like, hey, if we don't, make a big play or score some huge long run, like we're doomed because we're already down 21-0. I feel like the more your defense can keep you in games too, the less pressure Altmaier will feel, and then the less likely he is to have games like that Penn State game. Because weirdly, that Penn State game, your defense felt like it played decent, but you still let up, over 30-something points. I think Altmaier needed a game like that, and he needed to get that out of the way. But yeah, Altmaier looks more like what these 4 or 5 star quarterbacks coming out of high school look like. They really, look mature, look like they're less developmental pieces. They have more of the gunslinging and the ability to move. But yeah, honestly, I love the thought of like the zone read with Fagan, McCray, and then being able to just quick, dump to Franklin, and then him being able to run the ball. I feel like if last year was a 6 or a 7 for Altmaier, I feel like there's no reason why this can't be an 8 or a 9 with the weapons around him too.
And man, the quarterback position is the greatest equalizer in sports. If you have a really good quarterback, it just raises everything. I want to try you. We'll get to the defense, which is the big question mark, but let's go back and forth here, and we'll call this game. We're just brainstorming. Illinois will make a bowl game if the offense does blank. And I'll just start. If they average somewhere between, let's say, like, if Illinois averages 27 points a game, which if you consider some of the early opponents and some of that, like, let's say the Minnesotas and the Northwesterns of the world, Michigan States, and just the way college football is going, I don't know if 27, that's a big number, I know, but I also don't think it's outlandish. I think Illinois certainly makes a bowl game if they score 27 points on offense. What's another thing? The offense, if they do this, you're like, oh, this is a bowl season. Or if this happens.
If the offense does this, man, that's a great question. I think if you can get some, which I'd have to look exactly at the numbers. I think if you can run the ball, maybe not as good as you did a couple years ago, but definitely if you can keep getting better at running the ball and slowing down that game, your defense is on the field less. Altmaier feels like he has to make less plays down there. I think, yeah, if you can increase the amount that you're able to run the ball and really wear down other teams, if your offensive line can really get some of those pushes, I think on the offensive side of the ball, that just sets up so much. And we saw like I want to say it was like the Maryland game and a couple other games. That was the only reason that you were really able to win, because guys like Fagan, they just kept falling forward. So again, just going back to like some of the weapons and how I feel like the offensive line is going to be better. I think if Illinois can be even better, which I think they can now that the running back room is deeper, if they can get even better running the ball than what they were last year, I think there's no doubt that they can't scrape to 6.
So to add some context, I said 27 points a game. Last year, they averaged 24 and a half.
So that's it. Wow. I would have thought it was a little bit more.
That's right there for you. So 27, at first I was like, wait a second, am I getting crazy? No, I don't think 27 is crazy for this offense. And it might, I don't know if its highest ceiling is probably more, but you talk about the running game. Yes. 126 yards per game. And I think that the first 4 or 5 games really, really did a dent in that number, because it did get better, but it was too little too late. I'll give you one more, and if you can think of one more, great. If not, that's okay. Illinois will make a bowl game if they keep Luke upright. And I think there's a variety of factors to that. It's a very obvious statement to make, but there's a couple of benefits in doing so. One is his health, which, while it's not a huge concern, I think what happened in the Minnesota game, and did he get shaken up earlier in the year? Maybe not. I think he did play every game and basically every down except for getting benched in the Penn State game until he got hurt.
Well, the Kansas game, he got rocked, remember? And then there was a couple times I think he came out for a couple plays, but yeah.
So you keep him upright. That's one, just keeping him healthy if you do that. 2, it breeds confidence. I think that by just keeping him upright, he's going to be a little more confident in letting those deep routes develop and not feeling like he has to go check down or that he has to throw it away that, half second before something really would be open. Because I think you do have receivers that can make big plays if you give them 4 or 5 seconds to do so. And I guess that just feeds into overall, I talked about keeping him upright. That's an offensive line thing. But I think that also leads to number 3, which is if he's upright and something does break down, that does give him that split second more to use his legs, as you said. I do think that is a huge weapon for this offense. It has been for me on College Football 25, and God knows that's predictive of how Illinois is going to be this year. So keep him upright. Here's what we got. 27 points a game. better rushing offense. Would we want to say like 150, 160 rushing yards? I think that's
More consistent, yeah, all year long, I would say, yeah.
Keep him upright. And then is there anything else? One more thing to let this thing.
The last one I would say, which we even had some of this in the ReliaQuest Bowl season, and then definitely the beginning of last season, was stalemated offense. It's like the offense would go down and score, and then they wouldn't do anything for 2 quarters, or and then towards the end of last year, it was pretty consistent. You're putting up 10, 14, points a quarter, it felt like at times. And there were times, against like Indiana where you did it every time you needed to, and especially Minnesota at the end. I would say if you can keep that going where you're having less and less 3 and outs, like it felt like we did towards the beginning of the year. Which that's an obvious one, but that was one that I remember specifically, even at times in 2022, and then definitely the beginning of last year, where you're like, holy cow. If we could just capitalize here and, take advantage of this lead. Wisconsin, we had that lead. I know the defense really let a lot of points up, but at Wisconsin, if you didn't stalemate so bad there in like the late third, fourth quarter the game is so far to reach, and the defense doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's true. And I was going to bring that up. You scored, I think, 21 points in that game. 21. And it felt like that was one of the, like Luke was amazing. Oh, wait, he scored 21 points. No, that's true. I mean, obviously the ire I directed after that game and after most games last year was the defense, and we'll get to that. But you're right. I think that there is this weird kind of stagnation. It, I think, is the last remaining hurdle for Barry Lunney to clear, because I thought he called really good football. I'll even go to the Iowa game. There was nothing play call wise in the Iowa game that I was like, Barry, what are you doing? I thought that for what the game was, the calls were fine. It was just a bad spot here, or John Paddock not looking over there. And, before you knew it, you only scored, I think, 13 points that game, if that. The defense. So before we get into this, this is the tail of the tape for last year's defense. They gave up 29.5 points a game. They gave up 268 first downs. Troublingly, 33 of those were from penalty. They gave up 150 rushing yards per game and 228 in the air. And let's see, as far as interceptions, they only got 7 interceptions. And as far as forced fumbles, 19 fumbles by your opponents, but you only collected 8 of them. So we could argue that last year the bounces, like in Northwestern, just didn't go your way. And then I am always a hound for this stat, time of possession. If you win that, I feel like often you win the damn game, and they did in 2022. Last year, the opposing offense had it for almost 32 minutes a game. That's not going to keep your defense fresh. So, Isaac, confidence in the defense. Let's just start there. What is a reason to be confident? Start positive here.
A reason to be confident is that I don't know. To be like, I'm not trying to be harsh by any means. There's a lot of things where I'm like, wow, how could that get worse at times? Like with the secondary play, it's in like some of the penalties. Like it's like, I'm sure it could get worse, and somebody could pull up some stats from like 2016 or 17 with some of like Lovey's teams and be like, holy cow, it was worse. But there were at times it felt like Champaign Central could have thrown for 300 against our defense. So I don't think there's a way it could be worse. I do think Terrence Brooks is an awesome addition. I mean, I listened to the Texas 24/7 guy talk about him. And then, I mean, if you can start for, a college football playoff team, and Texas is so cutthroat, like those dudes are football players, right? Like they're bred different down there. I know I think he got burned a couple times, like in the playoff and everything, but also Washington had a crazy offense with 3 NFL wide receivers and a first round quarterback. So I don't think he's going to be running up against that too much. I think the secondary has to be better. And if similarly to how we were talking about the health, if Matthew Bailey can stay healthy, just looking at him, I mean, he's like an all bus team guy. And then freshman year, he definitely showed potential a couple years ago. And then even in his play a little bit last season, it was noticeable that he was out there, right? He's just a big presence. I would say those are reasons for optimism, and Xavier Scott seems to be coming along. I mean, like a corner you would want, a developmental guy who was able to get some reps behind guys like Spoon, and then now he's gonna, hopefully become that shutdown type corner himself. So I would say those are reasons for optimism, because I would like to think there's no way it could be remotely as bad in the secondary as last year.
Yeah, we aren't looking for a great defense, let alone I don't even know if the
No.
defense needs to be good. And what would a good Illinois defense be? Like, let's say top half of the Big Ten, I think would qualify as a good Illinois defense. And by the way, oh no, I just got the we only have 10 more minutes because of my Zoom package. I'm sorry, Isaac. We'll have to speed this up. I thought I had the unlimited, but there we go. Okay, so I think that oddly enough, the secondary, I would agree with you, is the area I'm most confident in if you were to tell me those 5 guys are out there the entire year. So if your corners and nickel situation is a Xavier Scott, Tyler Strain, who, yes, there was the Wisconsin play, but there's something there with Tyler. I think at nickel or corner, he could be fine, and Terrence Brooks. And then you got Matthew Bailey, a healthy Matthew Bailey, knock on wood, acting as your Sidney Brown. I think that changes things, and you hope Miles Scott improves as well. I'll take those 5. I think that's probably fine. Linebacker, you have Kreutz and Rosiak probably getting most of the reps. And then outside linebacker, you feel good about that with Coleman and Akis. But this just leads to the defensive line, and I know they feel better about, let's say, Briggs, Dennis Briggs, I think, is the transfer from Florida State, and they feel like they can kind of do it by committee. I think, oddly enough, Isaac, though, my concern is that we flip from a defense that just gave up big pass play after big pass play, and then we turn it now to a defense that is fairly good against that because you're outside linebackers in your secondary, but the middle is the weakness, and you're getting gashed. That I suppose would be my concern, and it's weird how it can flip just like that in one off season.
Absolutely. And I mean, we'll probably know this year, and it's easy to say, looking back on it, but I think it'll be super noticeable, like just the impact even that Johnny had just by himself, and plugging that up and putting pressure on the quarterback, things like that. But yeah, I agree. It's hard to say if the committee approach will work. I mean, on the defensive line, if there is a position group where really in the whole entire team where it makes sense to go more of a committee, it's obviously the defensive line, because a lot of times they go so many reps, which that was another thing last year that was frustrating though, right? Because like it felt like Johnny and Keith were always out on like important third downs, and you were constantly subbing these guys in. Yeah, Briggs should be definitely, I can't say an upgrade from obviously like some from Keith and Johnny, but that's again a guy that's old, he's played big time college football. I know Alex Bray, they're super high on guys like that.
Edwards,
Hunt,
you feel good about?
yeah, Gentle Hunt, they brought in guys like that. So there's a lot of names, a lot of guys that haven't really proven much. So yeah, hopefully you can figure out something. Excuse me, I got loose earlobes, I guess, today. But yeah, that's definitely gonna be a concern. But like Carpo's just looking. I mean, like you were saying, the defense doesn't have to be great necessarily. Oregon, Penn State, Kansas, and what, three or four offenses where you're like, oh crap, we're probably going to let up 30.
I'm not putting necessarily Michigan in that category yet. They'd be the obvious.
Not yet.
I think the Kansas, but luckily you got them at home. Penn State, Oregon's Oregon. That's the one where I'm like, just right.
Yeah.
That's okay. Right. And I wouldn't
Number 3. Yeah.
So we're just saying defense don't suck, right? Fair enough.
Yeah.
Like, let's say they finish 12th or 13th in an 18-team Big Ten. I think you're making a bowl game. I do. If you just finish 12th or 13th.
It's kind of funny, like saying 12th or 13th used to be your bottom of the barrel, and now it's like, well, you're just below average.
Exactly. In an 18-team Big Ten, I do think, our schedule's not as easy as last year, but I also don't think, or I should rephrase, it could have been worse. It really could have been. So let's do
Oh
some
yeah.
quick prognostication. We'll do kind of a quick fire, and Isaac, you and I will go right up to this meeting time, and I'll just close out with audio after that. So we'll use the rest of this. All right. Best chance for an upset. And let's go with we're going to leave Kansas out of that because I think early on in the season we'll call that a coin flip game, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's go for upset. I'll throw in at Penn State. I'll throw in Michigan at home. And I know it's silly. Yeah, Oregon, whatever. So really, it's a 2-horse race. Do you feel better about the possible upset in Happy Valley or the 100th anniversary of Memorial Stadium at home against Michigan? Because I feel very bullish on one of them.
Oh man, that's tough. Like, I almost feel better about Bielema's teams play better on the road, especially in those ranked games. I feel like so, and maybe it's because of what happened a couple years ago, but and I always have sort of like this PTSD thing with Michigan, like being so that might be I'm a little biased, but I'm just thinking back to Michigan. We just like never get them right. Like there was just so many times, even like the overtime game way back in the day. It was like we've had so many opportunities to get them.
I was there.
That almost feels like it would be too good to be true. Like on the 100th anniversary to beat Michigan. I mean, I hope that that's what happens with those uniforms. But I almost feel better about the Penn State because say I don't know totally who Penn State plays like early on, but maybe they slip one, they're falling a little bit, and you catch them at an okay time. And Bielema just runs the ball like he did, and like Maryland last year, on the road at Minnesota, obviously at Penn State a couple years ago, just feels like Bielema's teams almost play better when there's nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like, yeah, right. And I don't know, the Michigan one just feels too good to be true. I'm thinking back to a couple years ago when oh shoot, who's the little Matt Robinson came in and played quarterback? Was that his name? And he thought maybe he'd come back and beat him. Yeah. But I almost feel better about the Penn State one, maybe just because it's on the road and because he did it a couple of years ago. But
okay. That's fair. I'm very bullish on the Michigan game. I think Charlotte is going to just suck, and by their standards, that's like 8-4 after a national title. I don't think that they are just going to say, "Oh, Blake Corum," because he's gone, JJ McCarthy gone. I just don't think, despite the fact that Harbaugh probably has some other guys there, the fact of the matter remains that Harbaugh is a generational coach. He's just that good. So I think that they take a significant step back, and you have everything behind you. I could see us losing to Purdue the week before and beating Michigan. But you know what's funny, Isaac? Other than Oregon, let's talk about this real quick. We got 3 minutes. The game that we're going to lose, period. And I'll tell you which one I think.
Okay.
I feel better at Penn State than I do the week before on a Friday night in Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't feel that at all.
No, I don't like that. They're going to be – I feel like Nebraska could take a big step, which Riola, I don't know. Is he even like going to start that 5-star kid that they have coming in?
Raiola.
Friday night, Matt Rules, that place is going to be sold out, all that crazy stuff. I feel worse. I feel by far probably the worst about at Rutgers. I don't know why. Like Oregon, it's like I have no hope, but like Rutgers, I feel like it always feels like you're going to be 5-6 probably going into. So let's say you're 4-6 and Rutgers is having like a mediocre season. Northwestern's having an awful season. I feel like that's a position that I could see us being in. Or, like you're already at 5 wins and you just need to win one of your last 2 and you drop both of them. Rutgers just seems to be like even Bielema's first year, right? We should have beat Rutgers at home. That was a gross game. Yeah, I don't know. That's just a weird one. I think Trevor said it too in our group message that like he feels really, really bullish on Rutgers, which I can't say I've kept up enough with Scarlet Knights football, but that's one of those late season games where maybe you beat Michigan State at home, you feel pretty good, like you're at 5 wins, and then you got to stare down those 2. And we're playing Northwestern at Wrigley Field, right?
Right.
Yeah, so that if we have 5 wins going into Wrigley Field, there's no way. That would be the perfect 5-7 Illinois season.
All right, last question for you. We got about 30 seconds, Isaac.
Oh, shoot.
Kansas, and will we make a bowl game? And I think the answer will probably be the same for both.
I gotta say no. I gotta say no to both. I feel like I've seen too many times where we blow that. It's gonna be close. We might blow the Kansas game late, and I think we go 5-7. Unfortunately, just the schedule. We could be better than last year and go 5-7. Unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong, like I was a couple of years ago, like many people were a couple of years ago. But I don't like it. I don't like what you've lost and how you didn't replace the D line very well, and that's sort of where I'm at, unfortunately. But a 5-7, be competitive, maybe get to a bowl game.